Picture this. You're standing in your future mother-in-law's pristine kitchen, wearing your best dress, trying to make a good impression. She looks you up and down with disgust and says, "My son deserves better than some nobody who'll never amount to anything." Little did she know my father was about to walk through that door and deliver the shock of her lifetime. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The first time I met Rebecca Thornton, I should have known exactly what kind of person she was. It was a crisp October afternoon in 2019, and her son Marcus had been building up this meeting for weeks. We'd been dating for 8 months, and he was finally ready to introduce me to his family at their sprawling estate in Charleston, South Carolina. Marcus came from old Southern money. The Thorntons owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast, and their wealth showed in every marble countertop and crystal chandelier of their antebellum mansion. As we pulled up the circular driveway in my modest Honda Civic, I felt completely out of place next to the Mercedes and BMWs parked outside. "Don't worry, honey," Marcus squeezed my hand. "They're going to love you just as much as I do." I wish I could say he was right. Rebecca Thornton greeted us at the front door wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was perfectly put together, from her salon-styled blonde hair to her manicured nails, but her smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me. "Marcus, darling." She embraced her son warmly before turning to me with a noticeably cooler expression. "And you must be Sarah, is it?" "Sarah Mitchell," I extended my hand, which she shook briefly with obvious reluctance. The formal dining room felt like a museum, complete with oil paintings of stern-faced Thornton ancestors staring down from the walls. Marcus's father, William, was polite but distant, asking generic questions about my job as a logistics coordinator at a mid-sized company downtown. Rebecca, however, remained silent throughout most of the meal, studying me like I was some kind of specimen. It wasn't until dessert that she finally showed her true colors. "So, Sarah," Rebecca set down her crystal wine glass and fixed me with an icy stare. "Marcus tells us you're from..." "Where exactly?" Quote, "Columbia," I replied, referring to the modest city about 2 hours inland. "Born and raised." She pursed her lips. "And your family? What do they do?" I felt heat creep up my neck. This was the question I'd been dreading. "Well, my mother works as a nurse at the regional hospital, and my father..." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "My father works for the government." It wasn't technically a lie, but I'd learned over the years that mentioning my father's actual position often led to uncomfortable conversations or people treating me differently. I preferred to let people get to know me for who I was, not because of what my father did for a living. Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly. "Government work, how stable?" The way she said it made it sound like an insult. "And what are your career aspirations, dear? Surely you don't plan to stay in logistics forever?" The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me but didn't speak up. I kept my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I enjoy my work. I'm good at organizing complex operations and managing large-scale projects. It's more challenging than people assume." Rebecca let out a small laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "Oh, I'm sure it is. But Marcus is being groomed to take over the family business someday. He'll need a wife who can, how should I put this, complement his social standing. Someone who understands our world." The implication was crystal clear. I wasn't good enough for her son. The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable small talk, with Rebecca making subtle digs about my quaint hometown, my simple background, and my limited prospects. By the time we left, I felt completely deflated. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said as we drove away. "She was completely out of line. She'll come around once she gets to know you better." But I knew better. Rebecca Thornton had made her judgment, and nothing I did would change her mind. Over the next several months, things only got worse. Every family gathering was an exercise in humiliation. Rebecca would introduce me to their friends as Marcus's little friend, or make comments about how refreshing it was to meet someone so down-to-earth. She had a talent for making insults sound like compliments. The breaking point came at Marcus's birthday party in March 2020. Rebecca had planned an elaborate celebration at their country club, complete with a live jazz band and catered dinner for 50 guests. I'd saved up for weeks to buy a decent dress, but I still felt underdressed compared to the other women in their designer gowns and expensive jewelry. I was standing by the bar, trying to make conversation with some of Marcus's cousins, when I overheard Rebecca talking to a group of her friends nearby. "Poor Marcus," she was saying, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "He thinks he's in love, but he doesn't understand how these relationships work. She's obviously just after his money. I mean, what else could she possibly offer him?" One of her friends murmured something I couldn't catch, and Rebecca continued, "Exactly. She's a sweet enough girl, I suppose, but she's completely wrong for our family. No breeding, no connections, no prospects. Marcus needs someone who can elevate him, not drag him down." I felt like I'd been slapped. The worst part was that Marcus was across the room, laughing with his fraternity brothers, completely oblivious to his mother's character assassination. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I waited until most of the guests had left, then found Rebecca in the kitchen directing the catering staff. She looked surprised to see me. "Sarah, I thought you'd left already." "Mrs. Thornton," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, "I think we need to have a conversation." She dismissed the caterers with a wave of her hand and turned to face me fully. "Oh, about what, dear?" "About your opinion of me. I've been patient and respectful, but I can't pretend I don't hear the things you say. If you have something to tell me, I'd prefer you say it directly." For a moment, Rebecca looked taken aback. Then her mask of politeness slipped completely. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "Since you want honesty, I'll give it to you. You're not right for Marcus. You don't belong in our world, and you never will. You're a nobody from nowhere, with no family connections, no money, and no prospects. Marcus is going through a phase, but eventually he'll realize he needs someone worthy of the Thornton name." Her words hit me like physical blows, but I refused to let her see me break. "I see," I said quietly. "And what exactly would make someone worthy of your family?" Rebecca smiled coldly. "Position, power, influence, the kind of background that opens doors and creates opportunities. Something you clearly lack." That's when I heard the front door open and close, followed by familiar footsteps in the hallway. Marcus called out that he was back from walking some guests to their cars, but there was another voice with him, a voice I recognized immediately. "I hope I'm not too late for the party," the voice said. "My flight was delayed out of Washington." My heart started pounding. Rebecca looked confused as the footsteps approached the kitchen. "Sarah?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, grinning widely. "Look who showed up! I invited your dad as a surprise, but we thought he couldn't make it." Behind Marcus stood my father, still wearing his dress blue uniform, the 4 silver stars on his shoulders catching the kitchen's overhead lights. General Robert Mitchell, United States Air Force, looked exactly like what he was, a man accustomed to command and respect. Rebecca's face went completely white. "Dad," I said, my voice slightly shaky with emotion, "I'd like you to meet Marcus's mother, Rebecca Thornton. Mrs. Thornton, this is my father." My father stepped forward, with the bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years leading men and women in the most challenging situations imaginable. His handshake would be firm, his gaze direct and assessing. "Mrs. Thornton," he said in his crisp, authoritative voice, "I've heard so much about you." Rebecca was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The woman who had spent months telling me I was nobody, who had just finished explaining how I lacked position and power, was face to face with one of the most powerful military leaders in the country. And he was my father. The silence in the kitchen stretched for what felt like an eternity. Rebecca's perfectly composed facade crumbled as she stared at my father's uniform, her eyes fixed on those 4 gleaming stars that marked him as one of only a handful of the most senior military officers in the entire United States. Marcus looked confused, glancing between his mother's shocked expression and my father's calm, commanding presence. "Mom, are you okay?" My father, ever the diplomat despite his military bearing, extended his hand toward Rebecca. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Thornton. Sarah has told me wonderful things about your family's hospitality." I almost laughed at the irony. Even in this moment, I was protecting Rebecca by not telling my father the truth about how she'd been treating me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Rebecca finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. General? General Mitchell? That's correct, my father replied with a slight nod. Though please, call me Robert. We're practically family now, aren't we? The color drained completely from Rebecca's face. She'd spent months dismissing me as a nobody, with no connections, no influence, no power. Now she was staring at a man who commanded the entire Pacific Air Forces, overseeing operations across 24 countries, with a budget larger than most nations' entire GDP. Marcus was still trying to process what was happening. Wait, Sarah, your dad is a general? Like, an actual general? 4-star, my father answered before I could respond. I oversee approximately 10,000 airmen and women across the Pacific Theater. Sarah never mentioned it? I could see the wheels turning in Marcus's head. All those times I'd vaguely mentioned my father's government work. All those occasions when I'd deflected questions about my family background. He was starting to understand why I'd been so private about it. I prefer people to know me for who I am, not what my family does, I said quietly. It tends to change how people treat me. My father's keen eyes moved between Rebecca's stunned expression and the tension he could clearly sense in the room. 30 years of military leadership had taught him to read situations quickly. Is everything all right here? He asked, his tone shifting slightly. It wasn't quite his command voice, but there was an edge of authority that made everyone straighten unconsciously. Rebecca finally seemed to shake herself out of her stupor. Of course, everything's wonderful. I was just surprised. Sarah never mentioned. That's my daughter's way, my father said with a slight smile. She's always been independent, insisted on making her own path without trading on the family name. I'm proud of her for that. But I could see he was studying Rebecca carefully, and I knew my father well enough to recognize when he was gathering intelligence. He'd noticed her shock went beyond simple surprise. Actually, my father continued, I should thank you for how welcoming you've been to Sarah. Military families often face unique challenges, and it means a lot to know she's found such acceptance here. The word acceptance hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca's face flushed as she realized my father was giving her an opportunity to either confirm or deny her treatment of me. Of course, she managed, her voice slightly hoarse. Sarah she's lovely. Marcus moved closer to me, slipping his arm around my waist. She really is. I keep telling her she's amazing, but she's always so modest about everything. My father's expression softened as he looked at us together. Sarah's always been humble about her accomplishments. Did you know she coordinated the logistics for 3 major humanitarian missions while she was in college? Completely volunteer work, but she managed supply chains for disaster relief efforts that served thousands of people. This was news to Marcus, and I could see him looking at me with new understanding. I'd always downplayed my college internships with various relief organizations, partly because I didn't want people to think I'd gotten the positions through my father's connections. She has a natural talent for large-scale operations, my father continued, the kind of strategic thinking that's rare even in military circles. In fact, just last month she helped me review the logistics plan for a joint training exercise involving 4 different nations. Her insights were invaluable. Rebecca's mouth fell open slightly. The woman who had dismissed my career in logistics as simple and unimpressive was learning that I'd been consulting on international military operations. Sarah consulted on military operations? Marcus asked, clearly amazed. Unofficially, of course, my father replied. But when you're moving equipment and personnel across multiple countries with different regulations and infrastructure, you need someone who understands complex systems. Sarah's mind works differently than most people's. She sees connections and potential problems that others miss. I felt a warmth spread through my chest. My father had never told me how much my input had meant to him on that project. William Thornton, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke up. General Mitchell, we had no idea. Sarah has been far too modest about her background. That's one of her best qualities, my father said. She judges people by their character, not their positions or connections. She's always valued authenticity over status. The pointed nature of his comment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, clearly understanding that my father was delivering a message about values and character. In fact, my father continued, that's one of the things I've always admired about the Thornton family from what Sarah has told me. How you've welcomed her so warmly despite coming from different backgrounds. It shows real character to judge someone by who they are rather than what they represent. Rebecca looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. My father was masterfully giving her another chance to either own up to her behavior or continue the charade. But either way, she was trapped by her own previous words and actions. Of course, she whispered, we think very highly of Sarah. But my father wasn't finished. With the tactical precision of someone who'd spent decades in strategic planning, he moved to his final position. You know, he said, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp. Sarah was just telling me earlier about some concerns she had. Something about feeling like she might not be, how did you put it, sweetheart? Worthy of being part of such an established family. The word worthy hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Her face went ashen as she realized my father had somehow learned about our earlier conversation. Marcus looked shocked. Sarah, you never said anything about feeling that way. I didn't want to cause problems, I said softly. I know how important family harmony is to you. My father's expression grew serious. Sarah, you've never told me details about what made you feel unwelcome. Perhaps Mrs. Thornton could help me understand what might have given you that impression. The kitchen fell deadly silent. Rebecca was trapped between her lies and the truth, facing down a man who commanded respect from world leaders and held the power to make or break careers with a single phone call. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the marble countertop. I think there may have been some misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, my father repeated slowly, as if testing the word. I see. What kind of misunderstandings might lead my daughter to feel unworthy of acceptance from people who, I'm sure, pride themselves on their graciousness and hospitality? Quote, Rebecca looked desperately at her husband and son, but both men were staring at her with growing realization and disappointment. The truth was becoming impossible to hide. Perhaps, my father said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting answers, we should discuss this properly. I find that honest communication tends to resolve most misunderstandings quite effectively. The trap was closing, and Rebecca knew it. Her carefully constructed world of social superiority was crumbling around her, and the very person she'd dismissed as powerless was revealed to be connected to more real power than she'd ever dreamed of possessing. The weight of my father's expectant silence filled the kitchen like a gathering storm. Rebecca's breathing became shallow as she realized there was no escape from the corner she'd painted herself into. Her husband William stepped closer, his businessman's instincts telling him that something significant was happening. Rebecca, William said quietly, what is the general talking about? My father maintained his composed exterior, but I recognized the subtle signs of his growing displeasure. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Marcus might not have noticed, but I'd grown up reading these signals. I think, my father said with deliberate calm, we should all sit down and have an honest conversation. Sarah, would you mind explaining to me exactly what's been happening here? Marcus moved protectively closer to me. Sarah, what's he talking about? What misunderstandings? I looked at Rebecca, giving her one final opportunity to tell the truth herself. But she remained frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Mrs. Thornton has made it very clear that she doesn't believe I'm suitable for Marcus, I finally said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. She spent months telling me that I'm nobody from nowhere with no family connections, no money, and no prospects. Marcus's face went pale. What? Mom, that can't be true. Tell me that's not true. But Rebecca's guilty expression confirmed everything. William's business acumen kicked in as he quickly grasped the magnitude of the situation. His wife had been insulting and dismissing the daughter of one of the most powerful military leaders in the country. The potential implications were staggering. Rebecca, he said sharply, is this accurate? Quote, My father's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Perhaps, Mrs. Thornton, you could share with your family exactly what you told my daughter tonight. The part about her being unworthy of your family name. Rebecca's carefully constructed world collapsed entirely. I didn't mean, it wasn't personal. It wasn't personal? My father's tone remained controlled, but there was steel beneath it now. You told my daughter she was nobody. You questioned her worth based on what you perceived as her lack of connections and influence. How exactly is that not personal? Marcus looked devastated. Mom, how could you say those things to Sarah? I love her. You don't understand, Rebecca said desperately, finally finding her voice. I was protecting you. She's not from our world, Marcus. I thought she was just some ordinary girl trying to what? My father interrupted, his command voice finally emerging. The kitchen seemed to shrink under the force of his authority. Trying to what? Exactly, Mrs. Thornton. Rebecca shrank back as if physically struck. I thought she might be after his money. The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus made a sound of disgust and disbelief. You thought my daughter was a gold digger, my father said, his words precise and cutting. The daughter of a 4-star general. The young woman who turned down a full scholarship to West Point because she wanted to forge her own path. The person who has never asked for anything from anyone and who specifically requested that I not intervene in her personal relationships. Each fact hit Rebecca like a physical blow. I watched as she realized how completely wrong she'd been about everything. William stepped forward, his face grim with understanding. General Mitchell, on behalf of my family, I apologize profusely. This is inexcusable. But my father wasn't finished. Do you want to know what your son's girlfriend does, Mrs. Thornton? Really? Rebecca nodded weakly, unable to speak. Sarah coordinates disaster relief operations across 3 states. When Hurricane Patricia hit Louisiana last year, she managed the logistics for evacuating 12,000 people in 48 hours. When the earthquake struck Northern California, she organized supply chains that delivered food, water, and medical supplies to remote areas that FEMA couldn't reach immediately. Marcus stared at me in amazement. You never told me any of this. Quote, Sarah also serves on the review board for military family assistance programs, my father continued relentlessly. She's personally responsible for policies that have improved support services for thousands of military spouses and children. The defense secretary has her on speed dial because when there's a crisis requiring complex logistical coordination, Sarah gets results. Rebecca's legs seemed to give out, and she gripped the kitchen island for support. But here's what I find most remarkable, my father said, his tone shifting slightly. Despite having access to connections that could open any door in Washington, despite being able to name-drop her way into any position she wanted, Sarah chose to work her way up through merit alone. She deliberately keeps her background private because she wants people to value her for her abilities, not her family connections. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Rebecca had dismissed Sarah for lacking exactly the things Sarah possessed in abundance, but chose not to flaunt. William looked mortified. General, I had no idea my wife were horrified by this behavior. Dad, I said quietly, it's okay, I can handle this. But my father shook his head. No, Sarah, you've been handling this alone for months, trying to protect Marcus's relationship with his family. But respect is a two-way street. He turned his attention back to Rebecca, who looked like she wished the floor would swallow her whole. Mrs. Thornton, I want you to understand something. My daughter could have ended this situation at any time. One phone call from me to certain people in this city, and your family's business relationships could become complicated. Banking connections could cool. Permits might face delays. Government contracts could find their way to competitors. The blood drained from William's face as he realized the scope of influence they were dealing with. But Sarah specifically asked me never to interfere in her personal life, my father continued. She wanted to be accepted for who she is, not protected by who I am. She's been fighting this battle alone, with grace and dignity, hoping that eventually you might see her true worth. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let my mother treat you this way? Because I love you, I said simply. And I didn't want to put you in the middle of a conflict between your family and me. I kept hoping that if I was patient enough, if I proved myself worthy through my actions. You were already worthy, Marcus said fiercely. You've always been worthy. My father nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. Sarah's worth isn't determined by her family background, her connections, or her father's rank. She's valuable because of her character, her intelligence, her compassion, and her strength. Rebecca finally found her voice, though it came out as a broken whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't care to know, my father replied bluntly. You made assumptions based on prejudice and snobbery. You judged my daughter by superficial criteria and found her lacking without ever bothering to discover who she really is. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Rebecca's quiet sobbing. William stepped forward again, his businessman's instincts telling him to manage the crisis. General Mitchell, how can we make this right? What can we do to repair the damage? My father looked at me, his expression softening. That's not up to me to decide. It's up to Sarah. She's the one who was wronged here. All eyes turned to me. For months, I dreamed of this moment. The vindication, the revelation, the satisfaction of seeing Rebecca realize how wrong she'd been. But now that it was here, I felt more exhausted than triumphant. I don't need apologies, I said quietly. I need respect. I need to be treated as an equal member of this family, not as someone who has to constantly prove her worth. Marcus took my hand. You have that from me. You've always had that? And from me, William added quickly. Sarah, I had no idea what was happening. If I had known. But you didn't know because you didn't pay attention, I replied. Your wife was systematically undermining me for months, and no one noticed or cared enough to intervene. The truth of that statement hit the room like a thunderclap. Even Marcus looked ashamed, as he realized how many signs he'd missed or ignored. My father watched the family dynamics play out with the strategic mind of someone accustomed to complex negotiations. The question now, he said finally, is whether this family can move forward with genuine respect and acceptance, or whether the damage is too deep to repair. The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Could this family move forward, or had too much damage been done? I looked around the kitchen at the faces surrounding me. Marcus's desperate hope, William's calculated concern, Rebecca's devastation, and my father's measured assessment of the situation. I think, I said slowly, we all need some time to process what's happened here tonight. My father nodded approvingly. He'd taught me long ago that the most important decisions shouldn't be made in the heat of emotion. Sarah's right, he said. This conversation has revealed some fundamental issues that won't be resolved with a simple apology. Rebecca looked up from where she'd been staring at her hands. Please, I know I made terrible mistakes, but surely we can. Mrs. Thornton, my father's voice was firm but not unkind, you spent months systematically attempting to undermine your son's relationship. You questioned Sarah's motives, dismissed her achievements, and made her feel unwelcome in what should have been her second home. Those aren't mistakes. They were deliberate choices. Marcus stepped closer to me, his face still showing the shock of these revelations. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you. You couldn't have known, I replied, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. Your mother was careful to make most of her comments when you weren't around. William cleared his throat, his business instincts clearly struggling with the personal nature of the crisis. General Mitchell, what would it take to rebuild trust here? There must be something we can do. My father studied William with the same analytical gaze he'd used to assess foreign diplomats and military leaders. Mr. Thornton, trust isn't rebuilt through grand gestures or quick fixes. It's earned through consistent behavior over time. Then tell us what that looks like, William pressed. What does Sarah need to see from us? Before my father could answer, I spoke up. What I need is to not be treated like I'm auditioning for acceptance. I need to be included in family decisions that affect Marcus and me. I need Rebecca to stop making comments about my background, my career, or my worthiness. And I need all of you to understand that my value doesn't come from my father's rank or my family's connections. Rebecca flinched at each point, clearly recognizing her own behavior and my words. Most importantly, I continued, I need to know that if Marcus and I move forward together, I won't be spending the rest of my life being judged by impossible standards or having to prove myself over and over again. Marcus squeezed my hand. You won't. I promise you won't. It's not just up to you, Marcus, I said gently. Family dynamics involve everyone. My father had been quietly observing this exchange, and now he stepped forward with the bearing of someone about to deliver a strategic assessment. I've seen many families navigate difficult situations, he said. Military life creates unique stresses, and we've learned that respect and communication are non-negotiable foundations. Without them, relationships crumble under pressure. He looked directly at Rebecca. Mrs. Thornton, your son is clearly in love with my daughter. The question is whether you can accept that Sarah brings tremendous value to your family, or whether your prejudices will continue to poison these relationships. Rebecca's voice was barely audible. I want to try. I want to make this right. Wanting to try and actually doing it are very different things, my father replied. Sarah has already shown remarkable patience and grace. The burden of change lies with you now. William nodded vigorously. We understand. Rebecca, we need to talk privately about how to move forward. But I could see the exhaustion in Rebecca's posture, the way she seemed to have aged years in the past hour. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy for her. Her entire worldview had been shattered, and she was struggling to rebuild it in real time. Mrs. Thornton, I said, causing everyone to look at me in surprise. I don't want to be your enemy, I never did, but I also won't be treated as less than I am. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I don't know how to fix this, Sarah. I don't know how to undo what I've done. You start by seeing me as a person instead of a threat, I replied. You stop judging me by criteria that you wouldn't apply to anyone else. And you trust your son's judgment about the woman he loves. Marcus looked between his mother and me with something like hope beginning to show on his face. My father checked his watch. I should be getting back to the hotel. I have an early flight tomorrow. You're not staying with us? William asked, clearly hoping to extend the olive branch. Under the circumstances, I think that would be inappropriate, my father replied diplomatically. But I appreciate the offer. As we prepared to leave, Rebecca suddenly stood up straighter, as if making a decision. General Mitchell, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Would you be willing to have dinner with us tomorrow night? Before your flight? I know I have no right to ask, but I'd like a chance to show you that we can do better. My father looked at me, clearly leaving the decision to me. Only if you're genuinely ready to have a different kind of conversation, I said. No more pretending, no more judging, no more testing. Just honest communication between adults who care about Marcus. Rebecca nodded earnestly. Yes, that's what I want. Then we'll see you tomorrow, my father said. As we drove back to his hotel, my father was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. You handled that well, sweetheart. Better than I might have at your age. I learned from watching you navigate difficult situations, I replied. You always said that dignity and strength aren't mutually exclusive. He smiled. Your mother would be proud of how you stood up for yourself tonight. The mention of my mother, who had passed away 3 years earlier, brought tears to my eyes. She'd been the one who taught me that true worth comes from character, not circumstances. Do you think they can actually change? I asked. Rebecca? That remains to be seen. She's had a significant shock to her belief system tonight. Some people use that kind of wake-up call to grow and improve. Others just become more resentful. We pulled into the hotel parking lot, but neither of us moved to get out of the car. What would you do, Dad? If you were in my position? He was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. I'd give them one genuine chance to prove they can change. Not multiple chances, not endless patience, but one real opportunity to show they've learned from this experience. And if they don't? Then you'll know you gave them every fair opportunity, and you can move forward with a clear conscience, whatever that looks like. I knew he was right. Tomorrow's dinner would tell me everything I needed to know about whether this family could truly accept me, or whether the damage was too deep to repair. There's something else you should consider, my father added. Marcus saw a side of his family tonight that he's probably never seen before. That's going to change him too. Make sure you're both on the same page about what you expect going forward. As always, my father's strategic thinking extended beyond the immediate crisis to the long-term implications. I love him, Dad. But I won't spend my life being treated as a second-class citizen in his family. You shouldn't, he agreed. And if he truly loves you, he won't ask you to. We sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, both of us processing the evening's revelations. One more thing, Sarah, my father said as he finally opened the car door. You've proven tonight that you don't need me to fight your battles. But you'll always have my support when you need it. As I drove home alone, I realized that regardless of what happened with the Thorntons, something fundamental had shifted tonight. I'd stopped hiding who I was and started demanding the respect I deserved. Whatever came next, I would face it with my head held high. The next evening arrived with the weight of unfinished business hanging over all of us. I spent the entire day second-guessing my decision to give the Thorntons another chance. Marcus had called twice, his voice strained with worry about how his family would handle themselves. My dad talked to my mom for 3 hours last night, he told me during his second call. I've never seen him that angry with her. And Sarah, I keep thinking about all the times you tried to tell me something was wrong, and I just brushed it off. We don't need to relitigate the past, I said, though his acknowledgement meant more than he probably realized. Tonight is about whether we can build something better going forward. When my father and I arrived at the Thornton mansion at 7 sharp, the atmosphere was completely different from the previous night. Gone was the casual family gathering energy, replaced by the careful formality of a diplomatic summit. William greeted us at the door personally, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something closer to nervous deference. General Mitchell, Sarah, thank you for coming. Please, come in. The dining room had been set with their finest china and crystal, but the elegant table setting couldn't mask the underlying tension. Rebecca stood near the windows, wearing a conservative navy dress that was notably less flashy than her usual attire. Her eyes were slightly swollen, suggesting she'd spent considerable time crying. General Mitchell, she said, her voice carefully controlled. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. My father nodded politely but didn't immediately respond, letting the silence stretch just long enough to remind everyone why we were there. Marcus appeared at my side, taking my hand with a gentleness that spoke to his own emotional state. How are you feeling? He whispered. Like I'm about to find out whether this relationship has a future, I whispered back. Dinner began with stilted small talk about the weather and current events. Rebecca seemed to be struggling with every word, clearly terrified of saying something wrong. William dominated the conversation, asking my father respectful questions about his military service and current responsibilities. The Pacific Theater must present unique logistical challenges, William observed, clearly trying to demonstrate his newfound appreciation for military operations. It does, my father agreed. Managing resources across such vast distances requires exceptional coordination. It's actually similar to what Sarah does in her civilian work, just on a larger scale. I noticed how naturally he redirected the conversation back to my accomplishments, reinforcing the message about my capabilities. Rebecca finally spoke up, her voice tentative. Sarah, I was wondering, would you be willing to tell me more about your disaster relief work? I realize I never really asked about the details of what you do. It was clearly a prepared question, but the effort itself was significant. Rebecca was trying, however awkwardly, to show genuine interest in my life. Most recently, I've been coordinating supply chains for wildfire response in Oregon, I said carefully. When traditional transportation routes get cut off by the fires, we have to find alternative ways to get food, water, and medical supplies to evacuation centers. That sounds incredibly complex, William said with what seemed like genuine interest. It is. You're working with multiple government agencies, private contractors, volunteer organizations, and international relief groups. Everyone has different protocols, different capabilities, different limitations. The challenge is orchestrating all those moving pieces while the situation on the ground keeps changing. Marcus looked fascinated. How do you even begin to manage something like that? Before I could answer, my father interjected. Sarah has an unusual ability to see patterns and connections that others miss. She can look at a crisis situation and immediately identify the critical path. What has to happen first? What depends on what? Where the potential bottlenecks are. Like a chess game, I added, except the board keeps changing and you're playing against time instead of an opponent. Rebecca had been listening intently, and now she spoke again. I had no idea your work was so significant. When you said logistics, I thought you meant... You thought I meant filing paperwork and making phone calls, I finished for her. I know what most people think when they hear logistics coordinator. But you never corrected me, Rebecca said, and for the first time I heard something like genuine remorse in her voice. Would it have mattered? I asked directly, or would you have just found other reasons to disapprove of me? The question clearly stung, but Rebecca didn't deflect or make excuses. I don't know, she admitted. I hope it would have mattered, but I honestly don't know. Her honesty was surprising and, despite everything, slightly refreshing. My father leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Thornton, what do you think you were really objecting to about Sarah? Because it clearly wasn't her qualifications or her character. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with herself. When she finally spoke, her words were halting but seemed genuine. I was protecting something that didn't need protection. Our family's status, our position in society. I thought Marcus needed someone who would enhance our social standing. Someone whose family connections would benefit our business relationships. She looked directly at me. I treated you like a threat to our way of life instead of seeing you as a person who might enrich it. William nodded gravely. We've been having difficult conversations about our priorities and our values. About what really matters in choosing a life partner. And what conclusions have you reached? My father asked. That we've been approaching this entirely wrong, William said. We should have been asking whether Sarah makes Marcus happy. Whether she's a good person with strong character. Whether she'll be a loving partner and potentially a good mother to our grandchildren. Instead, we got caught up in superficial concerns about social compatibility. Marcus squeezed my hand. Sarah makes me want to be a better person. She challenges me to think beyond just business and social obligations. She's shown me that there's more to life than maintaining appearances. I felt a flutter of hope, but I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. Those are beautiful words, I said carefully, but I need to see actual changes in behavior. I need to feel like I'm truly welcome here, not just tolerated, because you've learned about my family connections. Rebecca took a shaky breath. What would that look like to you, Sarah? What would make you feel genuinely welcome? It was a fair question, and I realized I needed to be specific about my expectations. It means including me in family discussions that affect Marcus and me. It means not making snide comments about my background or career. It means treating me as an equal member of this family, not as an outsider who has to constantly prove herself. It also means, Marcus added firmly, that if anyone disrespects Sarah, they're disrespecting me. I won't tolerate it anymore, from anyone. His declaration carried a strength I hadn't heard from him before. Whatever else had come from last night's confrontation, it had clearly forced Marcus to examine his own role in the family dynamics. My father set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. There's something else that needs to be addressed. Sarah has been protecting all of you by not involving me in this situation. But if this pattern of behavior continues, if she's mistreated or disrespected in any way, I will consider it a personal matter. The threat was delivered with diplomatic politeness, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. William and Rebecca both understood exactly what that meant. That won't be necessary, William said quickly. We understand the gravity of the situation. Good, my father replied. Because Sarah deserves to be cherished, not merely tolerated. Any family would be fortunate to have her as a daughter-in-law. Rebecca was crying quietly now, but they seemed like tears of shame rather than self-pity. I threw away months of getting to know an extraordinary young woman because I was too proud and too prejudiced to see past my own narrow assumptions, she said. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for that. The question isn't whether you can forgive yourself, I said gently. The question is whether you can genuinely change your perspective and your behavior. She nodded, wiping her eyes with her napkin. I want to try. I know I don't deserve another chance. But if you're willing to give me one, I promise I'll do everything I can to earn your trust. My father caught my eye across the table, raising his eyebrows slightly in question. He was leaving the decision entirely up to me. I looked around the table at these people who would potentially be my family for decades to come. Marcus, who had finally shown he was willing to stand up for our relationship. William, who seemed genuinely committed to change. And Rebecca, broken and humbled but perhaps finally ready to see me as I truly was. One chance, I said finally. But it has to be real change, not just better behavior when my father's around. The relief on Marcus's face was palpable, but I could see he understood the seriousness of what I was saying. It will be, Rebecca said earnestly. I promise you, it will be. Only time would tell if that promise would hold. 6 months later, I stood in the same kitchen where Rebecca had once called me unworthy, but everything had changed. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows as I helped her prepare breakfast for a family gathering, celebrating Marcus's promotion to regional manager of their hotel chain. Could you pass me the vanilla extract? Rebecca asked, her tone natural and warm, a far cry from the cold politeness of our early interactions. As I handed it to her, I marveled at how different our relationship had become. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There had been awkward moments, careful conversations, and gradual building of trust. But Rebecca had kept her promise. The first sign of real change came 2 weeks after that dinner with my father. Rebecca called me directly, not through Marcus, and asked if I'd like to have lunch, just the two of us. No agenda, no family obligations, just an opportunity to talk. That lunch had been stilted and uncomfortable, but it was also honest. Rebecca admitted she'd spent most of her adult life judging people by their social connections and financial status because that's how she'd been raised. She genuinely believed she was protecting Marcus by steering him away from someone she perceived as beneath their family standards. I realize now how shallow and cruel that was, she'd said over coffee, but I don't know how to be different. I've never learned to see people any other way. Then learn, I'd replied simply. Start with curiosity instead of judgment. Ask questions because you want to understand, not because you're looking for ammunition. From that day forward, Rebecca began making genuine efforts to know me as a person. She asked about my work not to find flaws, but because she was honestly interested in understanding what I did. She inquired about my childhood, my friendships, my goals and dreams. The breakthrough moment came 3 months later, when a massive tornado struck rural Alabama. I was coordinating relief efforts from my office when Rebecca called, her voice urgent with concern. Sarah, I've been watching the news about the tornado. Aren't you working on that disaster response? Yes, I'm managing supply distribution for the affected areas. Is there anything our hotels can do to help? We have properties in Birmingham and Montgomery. Could we provide temporary housing for displaced families? I was stunned. Rebecca was offering her family's resources to support my work, with no expectation of recognition or benefit to herself. That would be incredible, I'd said. Let me connect you with the Red Cross coordinator. Over the following weeks, the Thornton hotel chain provided free accommodation for over 200 displaced families. Rebecca personally drove to the affected areas to check on the families they were housing, bringing supplies and offering comfort to people she'd never met. Marcus later told me he'd never seen his mother so engaged in helping others. She keeps talking about how meaningful the work feels, he said with amazement. She's asking me if we should start a charitable foundation. That was when I knew the change was real. Now, as we worked together in the kitchen, Rebecca seemed like a completely different person, not just in how she treated me, but in how she approached life generally. She'd started volunteering with several local charities, using her organizational skills and social connections to raise funds for causes she'd never paid attention to before. I got a call from the literacy program coordinator yesterday, she said as she whisked eggs for French toast. They want to know if you'd be willing to help them reorganize their volunteer scheduling system. Apparently, word has gotten out about your organizational talents. I smiled. I'd be happy to help, though I'm surprised they contacted you instead of me directly. I may have volunteered us both, Rebecca admitted with a sheepish grin. I told them we work well together on projects. Quote, the front door opened, and we heard Marcus calling out greetings to his arriving cousins and aunts. The extended family had been slower to adjust to the new dynamics, but Rebecca's transformation had been impossible to ignore. Sarah, Rebecca said quietly as we heard the family gathering in the living room, I want you to know something. When Marcus told us last month that he was planning to propose, my first thought wasn't about wedding planning or guest lists. I stopped chopping fruit and looked at her. My first thought was gratitude, she continued. Gratitude that he found someone who makes him genuinely happy. someone who challenges him to grow and think beyond his own comfort zone, someone who brings out the best in him. Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Rebecca, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness for how I treated you, she said, her own eyes glistening. But I'm so grateful you gave me the chance to become someone better, someone worthy of having you as a daughter-in-law. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She was now the one hoping to be worthy of me. We both grew from this experience, I said, giving her a spontaneous hug. That's what matters now. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face lighting up at the sight of us embracing. Everything okay in here? Perfect, Rebecca said, dabbing at her eyes. Just perfect. As the morning progressed, I watched Rebecca interact with the extended family, noticing how she'd started asking more thoughtful questions about people's lives and careers. She introduced me to relatives I hadn't met, as my future daughter-in-law, Sarah, who does incredible work coordinating disaster relief operations. The pride in her voice was genuine, and several family members expressed fascination with my career, asking detailed questions about my projects and experiences. Later, as the family gathered in the garden, my father called to check on how things were going. Better than I expected, I told him honestly. Rebecca has genuinely changed, Dad. Not just how she treats me, but her whole perspective on what matters in life. I'm glad to hear it, he said. And Marcus? How is he handling everything? I watched Marcus across the garden, laughing with his young cousins while helping them set up a game of croquet. He stepped up completely. He's been my strongest advocate with the family, and he's started getting involved in the charitable work Rebecca and I do together. Quote, sounds like you've built something solid there. We have, I agreed, realizing how true that was. The foundation is much stronger now because we went through this challenge together. As the afternoon wound down, Rebecca pulled me aside for a private moment. Sarah, I have something for you, she handed me a small wrapped box. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it. Inside was a simple gold pendant with an engraved compass rose. It belonged to my grandmother, Rebecca explained. She always said it represented finding your true direction in life. I hoped you might like it. The gesture was deeply meaningful. She was giving me a family heirloom, officially welcoming me into the Thornton legacy. It's beautiful, I said, genuinely touched. Thank you. Thank you, she replied, for seeing who I could become instead of just who I was. As Marcus and I drove home that evening, he reached over and took my hand. I have something to ask you, he said, his voice nervous with anticipation. I think I know what it is, I said with a smile. Do you? Because I've been carrying this ring around for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment, and I'm starting to think there's no such thing as perfect timing. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Pull over. He did, right there on the quiet country road leading away from his family's estate. As the sun set behind us, casting golden light across the fields, Marcus got down on one knee beside the car. Sarah Mitchell, he said, his voice strong and clear. You've made me a better man, a better son, and a better person. Will you marry me? Yes, I said without hesitation. Absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain, the confrontation, the gradual healing and growth. We'd all learned valuable lessons about judgment, acceptance, and the true meaning of worth. Sometimes the people who seem like your biggest obstacles end up becoming your strongest allies. Sometimes the relationships that feel broken beyond repair can be rebuilt into something even stronger. And sometimes standing up for yourself opens the door to the respect and love you deserved all along. The girl who had once been called Unworthy was now about to become part of a family that had learned to value character over connections, substance over status, and love over everything else. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.